Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions from the group? Or are you all now massive,
I
document experts?
don't have a question, but hi Ankush, thank you. This is wonderful. Thanks Wolfgang, Ralph, and Wayne for consistently putting this wonderful group together. I had the pleasure of creating my document with Ankush, and it was a challenging and beautiful experience wrapped into one. But I remember there's so much that I reflect back on, and this was 2.5, 3 years ago. And I remember one thing that when we finished Anchorage, you were talking about bringing it alive and how over the period of weeks, months, years, decades, I'd created my previous document. And you said to me, well, Steve, you now just got to bring this alive and creating it, speaking it, being it. And then you said this to me, you said, Steve, I'd like you to speak this to your clients. And I said to you, you can rest assured, Ankush, that won't be happening. And all of a sudden, we kind of looked at each other, and I had this overwhelming kind of understanding of, oh, wow, look at that real insecurity there. It was beautiful to spot it from and to kind of see how real that was. And something else that even when you and I had agreed that we were going to do it, I came back and I looked at my Mac and I thought, well, where does Ankush live? And I looked and it was 2.5 hours away. And I thought, right, well, I have to leave an hour earlier because I can't be late. If I'm late, I'm going to miss it. And so it's 3.5 hours, then the hour with him and then getting back. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm not going to be working with any clients that day. This is costing a fortune. I know. I'll do it on Zoom. And then I just had that moment of, oh, wow, this is your current document. You love cutting corners. You love the easy way out. And so before I'd even started on it, I saw one and you and I spoke about it. And I rang you up and said, I'll be coming to your house to do the document. It was that opportunity to kind of see it real and how it was part of me and seeing how I could just step beyond that. And so the journey's been fascinating. And I'm not even at the D of the document and the possibility of this. So thank you very much for who you are. And I'm enjoying this talk, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I really want to acknowledge you for going through the process. Um, there's cost involved in doing that, but there's also energy, like you say, time that you put into the process. And for me, it was the deepest change work I've ever done in my life. And I'd been around the block a little bit. I'd spent 20 years in personal development, you know, over a decade reading and whatever before I even became a coach. So when I came to this, I didn't really expect it to be that transformative. And then I go through it and I was like, wow. And some parts of it are tough. To really look at my default document was tough. I remember when I read out the statements that I collated and shared them with Steve Hardison. I mean, my leg was shaking. Like my leg was going like this. It was so uncomfortable because it was like I was finally revealing the the kind of the real me. It wasn't the real me. It was the worst version that I thought of myself, but it felt more vulnerable than anything I'd ever done in my entire life. And so anyone who goes through this process, especially goes through it with me in the way that I do it, I tip my hat to them because it's not always pretty. And I sometimes give the example of a home renovation. If you're going to renovate, a room or you're going to renovate a house, it will probably look worse before it looks better, right? When you got to rip everything out and you're changing the lights and the carpets and whatever you're doing, right? It goes through a stage of not looking as good, but that's part of the journey. And so again, that self-forgiveness piece, that healing piece, that looking at what our default document is super important. and I would say anyone who tries to create a document by themselves and just pulls a bunch of I am statements together, what you have is so far from what I consider a document. Um, don't expect it to do anything near. I mean, it's not bad. It's not like a bad thing to do. Sure, if you want to say a bunch of positive statements to yourself every day, great. But without that self-forgiveness work, it it's less than 0.1% of the impact. It's tiny. So I really want to acknowledge you, Stephen, for the work that we did together because not many people would do it, and I wish they would. I wish more people would invest in, and it doesn't have to be with me, but invest in that healing and seeing the truth of who they really are and not buying into their default judgments they have of themselves and other people. Anyone else want to say anything um, before we finish up?
I've got an observation with my document. I am that I take parenting in my stride. My son's 20, he's an adolescent. Naturally, there's tests. Yet it served me so powerfully. My question would be, is there a way of being that you've created and lived into in your document where you've been challenged most and needed to lean in deeper? If that makes sense of the context I gave, which for me is parenting.
Yeah. I mean, it's everywhere. So through the creation of my document, I've had to really look at myself as a husband and partner. That was one of the first areas, and it was uncomfortable. But I have a line in my document. I've a few lines. I'm an incredible husband and father. I'm powerful presence and deep listening, especially with my wife and son. I'm an incredible lover, partner, and friend for my gorgeous wife, Yamini. So those three, the other ones as well, but those three really speak to, who I am as a husband. Um, and I had to really look at that and go, wow, where that could be and where I am, there's a gap. There was a big gap. So that was challenging. It was challenging to look at that. It was challenging to look at how I was being in our marriage, challenging to look at, and then, I was getting coached at the same time by Steve Hardison, and you see how he is with Amy, and you see where he is with Amy, and I looked at where I was with my wife, and it's like, wow, there's so much to grow into that. So that was, a big piece. Then then again, parenting, right? I had one of my old statements was, I'm not a good parent or something like that. So I had to shift that around and not come from judgment, but forgive myself. And I was challenged there. Health and nutrition. After I created my document, I went and I got a health checkup. I had high visceral fat. I was the unhealthiest I'd been in my life ever. And again, that was an area that even after 20 years in personal development, I hadn't managed to get a handle on. It was like one of my secret shames. So there've been a lot of challenging areas, Ralph, in terms of living into my document, and and they still are because it's never complete. There's always, okay, well, what's the next level? Make the ceiling the floor? What's the next stage? What's the next stage? What's the next stage? And I see that. I see it, right? So right now, I'm really looking at being even more loving, and I've been loving to me, and I've been way more loving to other people. And then now it's like, okay, well, where's the edges of that? Where am I being loving up until a point, right? Where am I respecting, honoring, loving other people, except when, right? And going deeper into that. It's all challenging because it's not, it's the edges of who we're being.
In a mount or on a mountain without top. So it's
Yeah,
a lifelong work. That's what I took from that. Thank you.
yeah. You're most welcome. You're most welcome. It's all connected. It's all connected. So there's no way, and I say this to clients, if I'm working with It doesn't matter, man or a woman. And I say, if the only thing we did for the next 6 months or the next year was work on who you're being with your spouse, and we never spoke about business, we never spoke about it, and we only did that, there's no way at the end of our time together that your business wouldn't be improved. And I speak that not as an idea, but from experience. Steve Hardison suggested a couple of books to me last year. One of them was Real Love in Marriage by Greg Bear. And I read the book, and it's all about unconditional love in marriage. And it was like taking a hammer to my ego. And as I'm reading it, and it's talking about unconditional love with your spouse, I'm getting insights about client creation. It's got nothing on the surface, it's got nothing to do with client creation. It's got nothing, it's not a sales book on the surface. It seems really far removed from that. And yet, when I look to that, I'm like, this is everything to do with relationship, which is sales, which is enrollment. So again, I speak from experience that as I shift who I'm being, it doesn't just impact one area of my life, it impacts every area of my life.